going to be talking about control plans, and APQP stands for Advanced Product Quality Planning. And the reason why I say for software is because APQP is generally considered part of the automotive manufacturing environment. Moving on, the whole point of control plans and planning and advanced product quality planning is because whether or not you're trying to build a car or whether or not you're trying to build a website or a UI or any type of technologically geared experience, even when it comes to inventory control, or even if it's text-based or whatever, you have a preconceived notion about how things are going to go. We all think it's going to go smoothly. That's in our fantasy world, in our brain. But reality, we can see the road is pretty bumpy, and we can see the various conditions of the weather. Here it is raining, and here, of course, it is so deep you have to build a kind of like build a boat just to navigate the waters. And you can see here we're building basically some sort of a contraption to get over this gap, whether it's an actual rope or it's a boat to help us float over the deep dark abyss that is sometimes reality. Meaning, if you're a supplier to the big three, sometimes you don't have the proper labor, sometimes you don't have the proper supplies, sometimes you bid on a job and the costs are extremely bloated, and you didn't realize you were going to expand like this, and suddenly you do not even have the capital to invest in the raw materials that you thought you could afford, and you're not going to be able to ship the product to the customer, and then you lose sales, you lose customers, you lose reputation, and suddenly you have to declare bankruptcy. Same thing with software deployments. What you thought was going to be a smooth experience in which the user logs in and he's able to do what he has to do suddenly becomes a disaster. So you have a control plan to help account for all possible things. So it kind of involves basically mapping out your process flow chart. And examples of the symbols for a process flow chart including your start, your process, your decision, which is this diamond shape. And keep in mind, the diamond shape is here to interface with the various outcomes that comes into play. So is the user able to log into your system, yes or no? And it's okay if the user is not able to log in as long as you have a map to help the user accomplish that task. And even if it's like an 800 number or something like that. Another issue with software deployments, it could be bandwidth concerns. I recall when Obama first released and deployed the Affordable Healthcare Plan, the first thing that happened was the web server crashed. So that's obviously a matter of ill planning. But the problem is we can't really fault anything like that because sometimes the requirements change as soon as you release the software. That's why when it comes to software engineering, we look at it in terms of iterations. So you never really have a final product. It is an iteration. And then here is an example of a process flow chart, and we can make this a little bit bigger. Here we have the person entering personal details, and is the email in the database? If yes, then no. And if yes, there is the sign-in page, and is the password correct? Now, if the email is not in the database, then you're going to go ahead and create the user entry or the user profile, and you're going to ask, is the password strong? And then in the meantime, there's easy password warning, and then you go ahead and you create the account, and then you verify with an email verification link, and so on and so forth. So we all have been through signing up something or other, even if it comes down down to signing up for your class at school. But I'm telling you, you need to, for your project, be able to break down your actions and activities into these small, finite work tasks. And that way you can maximize. The idea of APQP, Advanced Product Quality Planning, isn't necessarily to eliminate all errors, because any process, you're not going to be able to do that. You could sit there and bounce a ball several times, 5 times, and all 5 times there's going to be a little variation between how that ball bounces. But the difference is, can you control that variation? Can you predict what that variation is going to be? Can you minimize that variation? So, for example, if you are doing a labor job, can you predict the output? If the output is 100 units an hour for the first hour, can you predict it's going to be 100 units an hour for all 8 hours of that shift? Probably not. If it's a labor job, what's going to happen is that you're going to see a little bit of a drop in production as the day wears on, because people get tired, and when they get tired, they get sloppy, and when they get sloppy, mistakes happen, and when mistakes happen, things have to be redone. So you have to anticipate those possible variations, and when you map out your process like this, you can in fact reduce the outcome of that variation. You can take that into consideration. So, for example, mapping this out, you can look at any type of cybersecurity concerns. So, for example, we see this email in the database. So you want to make sure that the person, when they enter in the email, actually enters in an email that is in its proper form. Because if they sit there and try to enter in an email in an improper form, you could compromise your system. Okay, so what do control plans do? It controls the risks identified in the FEMA. We will talk about the FEMA next week. So a control plan is a structured approach to control processes and characteristics, meaning we have an actual documented, predictable, repeatable method of controlling or trying to predict what happens with your process. So if we can predict where potential issues will occur, we can cut out the potential, I'm going to say, unforeseen incidences. Focuses, of course, on the customer. So in other words, a control plan is one part of establishing the customer voice in your process. So your process should be built upon ensuring customers are satisfied, but it should also be doing so in a manner that is most efficient to you. So, for example, a restaurant, 95% of restaurants go out of business in 5 years. Why is that? Because they're focused on giving the user an excellent experience, but they lose the fact that they can't give away the house. So a lot of people are like, well, I paid $50 for this steak, so the restaurant made $50. No, the restaurant probably made only a little. They probably only netted, in terms of profit, $5 or $10, because you have to understand that the restaurant has to pay for rent and utilities and labor. That's why, for example, waitresses only make $1 or $2 an hour. Everything else is in tips, because the restaurant couldn't afford to pay the waitresses a quote-unquote living wage. So the rest is just window dressing. The control plan, it just talks about key information. So looking at this, let me just skip a couple of steps right here. Here we go. We have here the beginning of the control plan right here, the process number. So what you're doing is you're going back here where you can label each of these as processes, and you can then go back to this. Sorry about this. You can then go back to this, and here's your process number, process name, and you don't necessarily have to put machine or device or whatever. You could describe what is doing the process. So here's the start of an actual control plan. You have your control plan number, your core team. So you don't have to worry about this part number and all that, but just do your part or process number right here, your process name. So this has to do with your operations, your characteristics. Really, what should the process be doing, and what method are you using to, I'm going to say, observe and control this and evaluate? How exactly are you evaluating this, and what is your reaction plan? Okay, so in other words, the things you have to focus on is, your core team, the control plan number, like the revision, the dates, and the approvals, who's approving this. And like, for example, you could make it so that I'm your approver, and that's fine. But really what you should be focusing on is your process, the process number, process name, and you should worry about what the process is supposed to be doing. What is your method of evaluation, and what are you doing in case it doesn't work out? That is what I want to see. And then finally, we have methods of control right here. And as it says, focus on process control rather than product control. Focus on preventing rather than detecting, because it's infinitely more expensive to realize you have been pursuing the wrong avenues after you have invested all this time, money, and energy. So that's where preventative measures come into play. Also, targeting nominal rather than specification limits. And here is an example or sample control plan for an assembly. You can take a look at this. We have the process names right here, the operation descriptions, the product, and the process itself. Sometimes you could see that some of the processes might refer to other documents. Don't be too shy to do that. And here it says the next steps, meaning follow, for example, 5S principles. So 5S principles include sorting, set in order, shine, standardization, and sustain. How does that pertain to software engineering? For example, every template or every form should try to have the same look and feel and standardized format as much as it is possible, and you try to have some sort of order to all of it, even in terms of its visual appeal. And that's about it. There's a lot of construction right now. We're in Michigan, and it is land of road construction. And you ever notice that some of the freeways that are being worked on, it's like they close down all the exits and you can't seem to find a way to get from point A to point B, like they close off all the alternative routes as well? Well, that is a result of poor planning. Now, going to the movie world, I'm old enough to have seen the very first Star Wars with Mark Hamill when it first came out, and I believe in the mid to late 70s, or 77 and 78, like the first one, Episode 4. It wasn't even called Episode 4 back then. It was just called Star Wars. Then The Empire Strikes Back, and then ultimately Return of the Jedi. That was the first trio of movies. That's what started the whole Star Wars lore and all the action figures and everything. And then we had the what I considered horrible prequels that started to come in the early 2000s or late 90s or whatever. And that was Episode 1, 2, and 3. And those weren't, I guess, by comparison to shows like The Acolyte, those weren't too bad. But I wanted to talk about The Acolyte for just a second. Here you have access to billions of dollars to sink in this series of only 9 episodes. You have all the lore at your fingertips. Who would ever think that you could produce such a disaster? Season 1 was canceled. So the question is, what could have prevented that disaster? First off, I guess you could say, focusing on the DEI aspect of it was a mistake. But the question is, how could you have avoided that mistake? How about proper planning? So when it comes to things like APQP, Advanced Product Quality Planning, as I'm going to show you, that usually relates to a certain industry, the manufacturing industry, but we can also apply the planning principles to things like software engineering. So what is engineering? Let me take a look at the definition of engineering. It is defined in Google under a website called Reddit, that is the branch of science and engineering and technology concerned with the design, building, and use of engines, machines, and structures, and the like. Engineering is the practice of using natural science, mathematics, and the engineering design process to solve technical problems, increase efficiency of productivity, and improve systems. So the idea is, we all know that no process is ever perfect, but we can establish what we call iterations, in which we have a structured methodology of improvement of these processes. But what is improvement? Is it making it cheaper? Is it making it more cost effective? Is it improving and making sure that the end user is more satisfied than before? And the answer is all of the above. And so I'll give you a great example. There was this one little store that my friend and I used to go to, and we could buy pizza and beer, and it was literally, you could get a big old piece of pizza and a beer for $1 a piece. So for like $2, you were good. And the problem is, the store went out of business. So even though we were satisfied, the store didn't last because they weren't charging enough money. So the idea is, how can you produce a product that the customer likes and to allow you to stay in business? The answer to that is having a structured, I guess you could say, troubleshooting aspect of it to each and every step. And that's what a control plan allows you to do. A control plan allows you to establish controls of your entire process from point A to point B. So the goal is to not only detect and prevent foreseen possible wrenches in your system, but unforeseen wrenches in your system. But the definition of unforeseen is that you don't know when it's going to happen. Well, that's why your product or process or service is an iteration, so it will always be improved. So let's take a look at this control plan and at this control plan PowerPoint.